night on the alien frontier was silent except for the hum of neon lights that flickered in the broken marketplace. A storm of sand had passed, leaving dust hanging in the air and shadows stretching long through the empty streets. The taverns were closed and only a few tired faces walked with heavy steps toward their shelters. Among them was a woman not human, her skin a pale silver that reflected the faint glow of the streetlights, and her eyes wide with hunger and despair. She walked, slowly as if each step carried the weight of her broken life. She had been told again and again that no one wanted her kind. They were poor, they were weak, and they were seen as useless by the colony traders. Her child was gone, taken by debt collectors, and now she was alone with nothing but a thin cloak over her body. The night air was cold and her stomach burned with emptiness. She pressed her hand over it, trying to silence the sound of hunger. As she moved past the broken stalls, she saw a man sitting near the corner. His hair dark, his shoulders broad, his gaze sharp but tired. He was human, unlike the others who looked at her with scorn. He looked at her as if she was not just an alien woman, but a living being. His eyes did not move away, even when she lowered her head in shame. She had been offered many cruel deals before, but now she had no strength left to resist survival. Whispered in her ear louder than her pride. She stood still, her feet refusing to walk further, and then her lips opened in a trembling whisper. Her voice was fragile, but it carried the sharp edge of desperation. She said, "Rent me for one night. Human, take what you want. I have nothing else to give." Her eyes glistened with tears, and her hands shook as she pulled her thin cloak tighter around her body. The man did not speak at first. His silence was heavy, and she felt the world closing in around her. She thought he would laugh or spit or walk away like all the others. Her heart beat so fast she thought it might break through her chest. But instead he rose from where he sat and walked closer. His steps were calm, steady, almost too calm for the chaos she felt inside. He looked at her, not with hunger, not with cruelty, but with something else. Something that made her chest ache in a new way. He asked her softly, "Why do you say this? Who forced you into such words?" She shook her head and turned away. She did not want pity. She wanted food, shelter, something to stop the emptiness that was eating her alive. Still, the words spilled from her lips without control. She said, "Even leave me pregnant if that is what you want. I do not care anymore. I cannot go on like this. Let me give you my body, so I can feel human for one night, so I can forget the cold and the hunger." The wind howled through the street, carrying dust across their faces. He stood in silence again, but his eyes never left hers. She could not read them, and that scared her more than hate. At least hate she understood. But his gaze was heavy with something different, and she did not know if it would destroy her or save her. Then he spoke quietly, so quietly she almost missed it. He said, "You do not belong to the night. You do not belong to despair." His voice was steady, but inside his chest his heart was pounding faster than he had ever known. This alien woman, broken and desperate, had touched something inside him that he had buried long ago. He remembered his own nights of hunger, his own fight for survival. He remembered the feeling of being invisible. She waited for him to claim her, to drag her away, to prove that her words had doomed her. But instead he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. His touch was warm and careful, as if he feared she might shatter. He whispered so near her ear that she shivered. "Stay forever, not for one night, not for shame, not for despair, but forever." Her knees weakened and she almost fell to the ground. The jacket smelled of smoke and earth, but it was warm, so warm that tears streamed down her face. She had begged to be rented, but what she had received was something her heart could not understand. She stared at him in shock as the dust storm moved past and the night fell silent once more. The silver-skinned woman stood, frozen in the silence of the market. Her breath was unsteady and her eyes searched his face for answers she could not find. The jacket around her shoulders felt heavier than iron, yet warmer than fire. She had expected a night of shame, a transaction that would leave her empty again, but instead she had heard words that changed everything. "Stay forever." Those words rang in her ears like a melody she could not silence. The human man stood calm before her. His frame was tall and his hands steady. His voice, though soft, had carried a power that broke through the walls she had built inside herself. She wanted to speak, but her lips refused to form words. She could only clutch the jacket and stare at him as if afraid that the moment would vanish, like smoke in the wind. He stepped closer and his eyes did not waver. He asked her name, but she hesitated. She had not spoken her name in so long, it felt like a curse tied to her suffering. Finally, she whispered, "Lyra." Her name floated in the cold air, and the sound of it made her chest ache. She had almost forgotten that she was more than hunger, more than despair. She was someone once, and maybe still someone now. The man nodded and answered with his own name. Elias. He spoke it without pride, without fear. He spoke it like a bridge between two broken worlds. He said, "Lyra, you will not sleep in the dust tonight. Come with me." She wanted to resist, to tell him she was not worthy to follow. But her legs moved before her mind could stop them. His steps were strong and steady, and she followed them through the ruins of the silent colony. The buildings around them were cracked from storms and neglect. Fires burned in barrels where other forgotten souls tried to survive. Lyra felt their eyes on her. As she walked beside Elias, she pulled the jacket tighter, fearing their judgment, but Elias did not slow. He walked with certainty, and the way he held himself made the watchers turn away, as if his presence was too heavy to challenge. They reached the edge of the market where a small shelter stood. It was not grand, not even stable, but inside was warmth. A small fire glowed in the corner, and blankets were spread across a rough wooden floor. Lyra stepped inside, hesitating at the doorway. Elias looked back at her, and for the first time she saw a faint smile on his lips. It was not a smile of victory or hunger. It was a smile of welcome. She sank to her knees near the fire. Her body shook not only from the cold, but from the weight of relief. She had dreamed of warmth, dreamed of a place where her body did not ache from the ground beneath her, and now it was here. Elias moved quietly, preparing a simple meal. He handed her a bowl of warm broth, the scent filling the air with life. She stared at it as if it were treasure, and then she began to drink, each swallow bringing tears to her eyes. For the first time in months, her stomach did not burn with emptiness. She ate in silence, afraid that if she spoke, the gift would vanish. Elias watched her but did not disturb her. He let her eat until her hands stopped trembling. When she finally lowered the bowl, she whispered, Why give me this when you could have taken me, when you could have left me like all the others?" Elias sat across from her, his eyes steady. He said, "Because I know the weight of hunger, because I know the emptiness of nights without hope, and because no one deserves to beg for survival." He leaned forward and his voice grew lower. "I do not want one night. I want truth. I want someone who stays even if the world collapses." Lyra could not breathe for a moment. The words cut deeper than any wound. She had come prepared to give herself away for nothing, but she was being offered something far greater. Her heart pounded, with both fear and longing. She wanted to believe him, but the scars of her past whispered lies. She shook her head, unable to accept, yet unable to run. Elias did not push. He only reached out his hand across the floor, his palm open, waiting for her choice. The firelight flickered between them, casting shadows on the walls. Lyra stared at his hand, her breath trembling. The silence stretched long and heavy. Her mind screamed warnings, but her heart whispered hope. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her own hand and placed it in his. The warmth of his skin spread through her body, and her eyes filled again with tears. For the first time in so long, she did not feel alone. She did not feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt alive. The fire burned low inside, the small shelter casting shadows across the rough walls. Lyra sat close to the warmth, still holding Elias' hand, as if afraid it might vanish if she let go. Her body was weak, but her spirit trembled with something new. She had begged to be rented for one night, but instead she had been offered something beyond her imagination. The thought of staying forever scared her more than hunger, because forever meant trust, and trust was something she had lost long ago. Elias watched her carefully. His eyes did not wander and his grip on her hand was steady. He did not rush her. He knew that broken souls could not be healed with haste. He had seen enough pain in his own life to understand the slow weight of despair. He let her breathe in silence, and in that silence she felt a strange calm slowly creep into her chest. When the meal was finished, Elias stood and placed more wood on the fire. Sparks flew upward, and Lyra followed them with her eyes. Her thoughts drifted back to her lost child. The memory stabbed at her heart and tears threatened to rise. She turned her face away, not wanting Elias to see her weakness, but he saw the pain in her trembling shoulders. He did not ask, but he sat beside her again. His presence enough to let her know she was not alone. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. Her words were soft, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. She said, "They took my child." She could not bring herself to say more, but the weight of those 4 words filled the air like thunder. Elias' heart clenched. He did not know the details, but he understood the cruelty of this world. He leaned closer and whispered, "I will not let them take more from you." Her eyes widened. She wanted to believe him, but doubt clawed at her soul. She asked quietly, "Why would you protect me? Why risk anything for me?" Elias looked into the fire, and then back at her. His voice was strong. "Steady, because you deserve life. Because you deserve more than what they left you. With I cannot look at you and turn away." Lyra felt her throat tighten. She had begged strangers before, but no one had ever looked at her this way. She had been seen as property, a burden, a body, nothing more. Now in the eyes of this human, she was something else. She was worth protecting. She was worth staying for. The thought shook her and she pressed her hands to her chest as if to hold her breaking heart together. The night grew darker. The wind howled outside, and the walls rattled under the storm. Elias stood and checked the entrance, securing the board so no sand would sweep inside. Lyra watched him move with calm purpose. His strength was not only in his body, but in the way he carried himself, as if the chaos of the world could not break him. She realized that for the first time she felt safe. When he returned to the fire, he handed her a blanket. She accepted it slowly, her fingers brushing his hand again. The simple touch sent warmth through her body that no fire could give. She lay, down near the flames, pulling the blanket over herself. Her eyes grew heavy, but her heart raced with questions. She whispered, "Elias, if I stay, will you not regret it?" His answer came quick, without hesitation. "Never." Her tears slid down her face as she closed her eyes. Sleep came, but it was not the restless sleep of the streets. It was deep and heavy, carrying her into dreams she had long forgotten. Dreams of laughter, dreams of safety, dreams of a future. Elias sat awake long after her breathing became steady. He studied her face in the glow of the fire. Her silver skin shimmered faintly, and her fragile form curled beneath the blanket stirred something in him that he had not felt in years. He whispered to himself, "I will keep her safe, even if it costs me everything." Outside, the storm raged, but inside the shelter a fragile bond had been born. A bond that would soon be tested by the cruel world beyond these walls. But for this night, it was enough. The storm ended with the first light of dawn. The market outside the shelter slowly stirred back to life. The sound of traders shouting and the clang of metal filled the air. Lyra woke to the noise, her eyes fluttering open as the blanket slid from her shoulders. She sat up quickly, panic rushing through her as if she had forgotten where she was. But then she saw Elias sitting by the door, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into the shape of a blade. His calm figure reminded her that last night had not been a dream. She touched the jacket he had given her, still wrapped around her shoulders. It was warm and carried his scent. She felt her chest tighten with something she could not explain. She had begged for one night, yet she had been given safety, and she did not know how to hold it. In her heart she whispered his name, Elias. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with steady calm. She asked softly, "Why do you stay awake while I sleep?" he answered. Because you need to rest. Because I promised myself I will not let harm reach you. His words filled her with warmth, yet also fear. She had heard promises before and all had been broken. She hugged the jacket tighter and lowered her gaze. Elias noticed the shadow in her expression and said, I will prove it with action. Not only with words. He stood and opened the door, letting in the morning light. The market was noisy and rough, but Elias did not hesitate. He turned to her and said, Come with me. You are not hiding anymore. Lyra hesitated. She remembered the faces of those who had laughed at her, who had offered her cruel bargains. She feared the eyes of the market, but when Elias held out his hand again, she found her fingers reaching for his. They stepped into the open streets together. The sun rose over the colony, casting light on cracked buildings and broken stalls. People turned their heads to look. Some sneered at the sight of a human walking with an alien woman. Others whispered, but Elias walked as if none of it mattered. They reached a vendor who sold food. Elias placed a few worn credits on the counter and bought bread and fruit. He handed the bread to Lyra, and she stared at it, unable to believe it was hers. The vendor muttered under his breath, calling her names, but Elias fixed him with a sharp look that silenced him. Lyra bit into the bread and tears filled her eyes again. Each bite reminded her she was alive, reminded her she was not invisible. As they walked further, Lyra felt the stares burning into her skin. She whispered, Elias, they hate me. They hate my kind. Elias stopped and faced her. His eyes were strong, his voice firm. Let them hate. Their hate does not matter. You are not what they say you are. You are more. She wanted to believe him, and the way he looked at her made it hard not to, but danger was never far. In the crowd, two men with rough armor and cruel smiles stepped forward. Their eyes locked on Lyra, and one of them sneered, Debt property, that one belongs to us. Lyra froze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She recognized them. They were part of the group that had taken her child. Her legs shook and she wanted to run, but Elias moved between her and the men, his body a shield, his hand tightening around the scrap blade he had sharpened. The men laughed at him. Human, you dare to stand in the way she is marked. She owes, and so do you. Now Elias did not move. His voice was low and steady. You will not touch her. The men lunged forward, and the market paused to watch. Lyra cried out, Elias. But he stood firm. The first man swung, but Elias dodged the strike and drove his shoulder into the attacker, sending him stumbling into a stall. The second man drew a rusted weapon, but Elias grabbed his wrist and twisted hard. The weapon clattered to the ground. The crowd gasped as Elias pressed the blade against the man's throat. His voice cut through the noise. If you want her, you will go through me, and I promise you will not leave whole. The men glared, but fear flickered in their eyes. They backed away, muttering threats before disappearing into the crowd. The market slowly returned to noise, but whispers spread fast about the human who had defied the collectors. Lyra stood trembling. She could not believe what she had seen. She walked to Elias, and her voice shook. You risked everything. For me, why? Elias lowered the blade, his eyes still sharp but softer when they met hers. He answered, because you are not theirs, you never were. She felt the truth in his words strike deep into her chest. Her tears fell, but this time they were not only of fear. They were of hope. The sun climbed higher, casting light on both of them. The bond between them had grown stronger, but so had the danger around them. And though fear still lived in her heart for the first time, she also felt something stronger. A fragile but burning belief that maybe she could stay forever. The marketplace still buzzed with whispers after the clash. Elias and Lyra had barely escaped the collectors, but their eyes followed them, as if waiting for another fight. Lyra clutched the bread close to her chest, though she could hardly swallow. Her heart pounded with fear and confusion. Her mind screamed to run far away, but her feet stayed beside Elias. He walked steady, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning every corner for danger. She realized he was not only protecting her, he was preparing for what would come next. They reached the edge of the market where the noise faded into empty streets. Lyra finally spoke, her voice small. They will come back. They always come back. She looked down at the dust beneath her feet, feeling the weight of despair again. Elias stopped and turned to face her. His voice was firm yet gentle. They will return, but so will I. I will not let them take you again. Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, but memories of betrayal still haunted her. She whispered, "You cannot fight them all. They own this colony. They own everything." Elias shook his head slowly. "They own nothing that I refuse to give. They cannot own you unless you surrender, and I know you will not surrender anymore." His conviction struck her heart like a spark in dry grass, and she felt something new rising inside her. Not just fear, but defiance. As they returned to the shelter, the streets grew quieter. The wind carried the scent of smoke and ash. The colony was restless, always on the edge of violence. Elias led her through hidden alleys, avoiding groups of rough men who watched with greedy eyes. Finally, they reached the small firelit room that had become their haven. Lyra sank onto the floor, her body trembling from exhaustion. Elias placed the bread she had carried onto the table and sat across from her. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of fire. At last Elias spoke. "Tell me about your child." Lyra froze. The words pierced her heart, and for a moment she could not breathe. She closed her eyes and whispered. She was small, too small, her skin like silver, like mine, but softer. Her laugh was light even when there was no food. She would laugh. She stopped, her voice cracking. "They took her because I could not pay. They said she was worth more to them than I was." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Elias listened without interrupting. His hand tightened into a fist at her. His anger was not loud, but it burned in his eyes. He leaned forward and said, "We will find her." Lyra snapped, her eyes open, her body shaking with both hope and fear. "Do not say that. Do not give me hope, if it will break me again." Elias' voice did not falter. "I do not make empty promises. If she lives, we will find her." The firelight reflected in Lyra's tears. She stared at him, unable to speak. Her heart wanted to trust, but fear screamed louder. Yet something inside her whispered that Elias' words carried more weight than the hollow promises of others. She wiped her tears, and for the first time she said softly, "Then I will stay, until we know." Elias reached across the table and took her hand. Again his grip was steady, not forceful, only steady. The warmth of his touch seeped into her bones. She looked at their joined hands and felt strength she had not felt in years. The fear did not vanish, but it no longer ruled her entirely. That night, the storm outside grew strong again. Dust hammered against the walls. The shelter shook, but inside it was calm. Elias sat with his back to the door, his blade near his hand. His eyes remained open, watching the shadows while Lyra drifted to sleep beside the fire. She dreamt of her child, but this time the dream was not filled with screams. It was filled with laughter, and the image of Elias standing beside them like a shield against the darkness. As dawn approached, Elias whispered to himself, "I will not fail her." He felt the weight of his vow pressing down on his chest, but he welcomed it. He had carried burdens before, but this one was different. This burden was life. This burden was worth every drop of blood he had left to give. The storm outside raged, but inside two souls had begun to build something unbreakable. They had survived hunger and cruelty, but now they faced a greater trial. The collectors would not stop, and the colony would not forgive. But Elias was ready, and Lyra, for the first time in her life, was ready too. The morning sun rose weak over the broken colony. The sky was painted with dull shades of gray, and the air carried the bitter taste of dust. Lyra woke to the sound of Elias moving quietly around the shelter. He was preparing supplies, scraps of metal tied into makeshift weapons, a small pouch of dried food, a flask of water. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, confusion heavy in her voice. "Where are we going?" Elias looked at her, his gaze steady. We cannot stay here. They will return stronger and with more men. If we remain, they will take you, and I will not allow it." Her heart raced at his words. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Leaving meant danger. Leaving meant unknown paths. But staying meant certain capture, she whispered. "Where can we go?" Elias answered. "To the hills beyond the colony. There are caves there. I know the land, and I can keep you safe until we decide our next step." She swallowed hard, fear clawing at her chest. "But what about my child?" Elias' eyes softened. "We will search for her from there. We need strength and safety before we can fight them." She rose slowly, her legs unsteady but her resolve firmer than before. She had lived in shadows too long, always waiting for others to decide her fate. Now she had a choice, and though fear lived in her veins, hope now beat louder. She nodded silently and began to gather what little she had, which was nothing more than the jacket he had given her. Elias noticed and placed half of the food pouch into her hands. "This is yours, not mine." She hesitated but took it, her eyes glistening with unspoken thanks. They stepped into the streets, moving carefully through the colony. The market was louder now, traders shouting deals while children darted between stalls, yet beneath the noise tension simmered. Whispers followed them, the human and the alien woman who defied the collectors. Some looked with pity, others with hatred. Elias ignored them. His steps were firm, his hand near his blade. Lyra stayed close, her eyes darting nervously at every shadow. Near the edge of the colony, a group of men blocked their path. Their armor was rough, their smiles cruel. The leader stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with greed. He sneered. "You think you can just walk out with our property, human?" Elias' body stiffened. His voice was calm but sharp. "She is not property." The man laughed, a harsh sound echoing through the street. "Everything here is property if we say so. Hand her over or bleed." Elias shifted his stance, his hand gripping the blade. Lyra's heart pounded. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. The men advanced, but Elias struck first. His blade flashed, catching the leader across the arm. Blood sprayed, and the man roared in rage. The others lunged. Elias fought with precision, his strikes clean, his movements driven by fury. He knocked one man to the ground, kicked another into a wall, but there were too many. Lyra screamed his name as a heavy fist struck his side. Elias staggered, yet he did not fall. He growled through clenched teeth. "You will not take her." The ferocity in his eyes froze them for a moment. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Enough." The men stopped and turned. A tall figure approached, draped in dark robes, marked with the insignia of the collectors. His eyes were cold, his steps slow but filled with authority. The crowd parted in silence. Lyra trembled as she recognized him. He was the overseer, the one who had ordered her child taken. The overseer looked at Elias and then at Lyra. A thin smile curved his lips. "Interesting. You protect her even after she begged to be rented for one night. Do you not see her worthlessness?" Elias' eyes burned with fire. "She is not worthless. She is more human than you." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The overseer gaze hardened. His voice was low and dangerous. "You will regret those words. Take them both." The soldiers moved forward again. Elias raised his blade, but Lyra grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. "Elias, we cannot fight them all, not like this." Elias' chest heaved with rage, but he saw the fear in her eyes. He made a choice. He grabbed her hand and shoved through the crowd, dragging her into the nearest alley. The soldiers shouted and gave chase. They ran through narrow passages, their breaths ragged, footsteps pounding behind them. Elias pulled her faster, his grip unyielding. They burst through a broken gate and out into the barren land beyond the colony. The soldiers followed, but the storm winds rose again, sweeping sand into the air, blinding the pursuit. Elias led her up the rocky path toward the hills. His lungs burned, his body ached, but he refused to stop. Lyra stumbled, yet he caught her each time, refusing to let her fall. By the time the storm grew, Heavier, they reached the first rise of the hills. The colony was a blur behind them, and the soldiers were lost in the storm. Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Elias knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. His voice, though tired, carried unshaken resolve. You are safe for now. She looked at him, tears mixing with the dust on her face. Safe with you, she whispered. He nodded his promise, silent but clear. The storm roared around them, but in the hollow of the hills, a fragile hope burned, stronger than ever. The storm raged across the barren land, but within the shelter of the rocky hills, Elias and Lyra found a brief silence. The cave was narrow, but deep, its walls rough and jagged. The sound of the wind outside was loud, yet inside the air was still. Elias built a small fire with dried roots and broken wood he had gathered on the way. The flames flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the stone walls. Lyra sat near the fire, pulling the jacket closer around her body. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, the weight of fear still pressing on her heart. Elias sat across from her, his blade resting on the ground beside him. His eyes remained sharp, watching the cave entrance. He spoke in a low voice. They will not give up. They will search until they find us. Lyra lowered her head, her voice trembling. They will never stop. They took my child. They will hunt me until I am gone. Elias leaned forward, his eyes burning with conviction. Then we do not hide forever. We fight back. His words made her heart race. She stared at him wide-eyed. You would fight them for me. Why? Elias did not hesitate. Because no one deserves chains. Because no child deserves to be stolen. Because you asked me for one night, but I will not leave you to despair. I want you to stay, not as property, not as a burden, but as someone who matters. Her throat tightened with emotion. She remembered the moment she had whispered, "Rent me for one night." Her voice had been filled with shame and emptiness. Now this human looked at her as if she was worth more than the stars. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to his promise. She whispered, "But what if they kill us?" Elias smiled faintly, his smile carrying both sadness and fire. Then I will die knowing I chose to protect what matters more than my own breath. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Lyra felt her tears fall. Yet this time they carried warmth, not only sorrow. She moved closer until she sat beside him. The heat of the fire and the warmth of his presence wrapped around her. She whispered, "You are strange, human. I begged for nothing, and you gave me everything." Elias looked at her, his voice soft. "You gave me something too. You reminded me why I fight." The night, stretched long shadows shifted across the stone, and the storm outside slowly faded. Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder, her silver skin glowing faintly in the firelight. She whispered softly, "Stay with me." Elias turned his head and whispered back. Always his voice carried no doubt, only truth. As dawn broke, the storm cleared. The land outside was scarred with dust, but the horizon shone with pale light. Elias stood stretching his tired muscles. He looked at the world beyond the hills and then at Lyra, who was still wrapped in the jacket. She looked fragile yet stronger than he had ever seen. He spoke, "We will search for your child. We will follow every trail until we find her." Lyra's eyes widened, with both fear and hope. "Do you truly mean it?" Elias answered. "I swore to protect you. I swore to give you more than one night. That vow includes finding your child." Her heart trembled. She rose and walked to him. Her steps were slow but steady. She placed her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath his skin. She whispered, "Then I will trust you. I will stay." Elias placed his hand over hers, his gaze unwavering. "Then stay forever."